Welcome to the Microcast, the short-form podcast from Microcosm Coaching, where we break down the science, strategy, and psychology behind smarter endurance training. Each week, we tackle a key concept in running, training, or recovery, and we give you practical tools you can apply right away, whether you're building back, leveling up, or chasing down a big goal. We keep it short, evidence-based, and grounded in real coaching experience. No hype, no fluff, just actionable insights to help you train sustainably and perform at your best. Let's get into it.
Over the next few weeks, we're going to introduce you to a few other Microcosm coaches on our podcast, so you can hear a little bit from them on who they are and what they're about.
My name is Zachary Russell. I'm a coach for Microcosm Coaching. My story began back in college. I was on a trail run with some friends. They absolutely demolished me, and so I went back to college after spring break and started on the treadmill and got into running that way. Eventually became kind of full on board with marathons, triathlons, eventually wanted to do an Ironman, and really just found a community in running. People that I really enjoy coaching are athletes that have a desire to explore themselves and adventure. So not just necessarily one who's like, I want to PR this marathon, I want to run this time, but athletes that are a little bit, think about it in a more creative sense. And so athletes that I enjoy are ones that do multiple sports, whether it's competitively or recreationally, or just needing some sort of person to structure their daily or weekly training to kind of balance all of these things together. Being an athletic trainer and strength coach and having a lot of knowledge in nutrition, I think that I bring this well-rounded person to my coaching. Having this background of athletic training, my experiences in multiple disciplines, whether it's Ironman, triathlon, trail running, marathoning, with these long gravel races or mountain bike races that I've done, just a lot of experience that I can bring to the athletes and kind of talking points or touch points that, I've experienced these things and kind of can relate to a lot of these athletes. I would say my favorite athletes, the things that they have in common is their desire to learn more. And so they're always asking questions in their Training Peaks log. They're always wanting to know, okay, well, why did you put this here? Or why did you put that here? Why are we doing this long run this week, but then we're going shorter the next week? Or, what's the purpose of this workout? And so it's an athlete that's invested in the program. They're not just out there clicking buttons, getting through each day. I mean, yes, those athletes are great as well. I enjoy those, but ones that are a little bit more invested and also participate in kind of multiple sports. I, as a coach, take on a very small athlete load so that I can invest a little bit more time into each individual athlete. I help weekend warriors and multi-sport athletes achieve realistic goals and balancing training load to achieve actionable dreams, whether it's races or getting out and climbing the next 14er.
If you want to get to know anyone else on our staff, reach out. We have roster spots available. microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Microcast. I'm Zoe. TJ is off this week, so instead of our usual programming, we have something really fun and special for you, an interview with our coach, Coach Cliff Pittman. If you don't know Cliff, he's the director of coaching at CTS, which is Carmichael Training Systems, which means he's essentially a coach of other coaches. He oversees the education and development of their entire coaching staff. And he is, like I said, full disclosure, our coach, mine and TJ's, so this is the guy that we trust with our own trainings. So we wanted to bring him on to have an honest conversation about what coaching actually is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't. We get into the invisible work that goes on behind the scenes, why individualized training matters so much more than a static plan, scope of practice, and when a good coach should say, hey, that's above my pay grade. The gap between what athletes expect coaching to cost and what it actually costs, and how to find a coach who's the right fit for you, not just the most credentialed person on paper. Whether you're currently coached, thinking about it, or coaching athletes yourself, I think there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Cliff brings a really unique perspective from his background in the military, executive coaching, and now leading one of the biggest coaching organizations in endurance sports. Let's get into it. All right, I'm excited because today we are joined by our coach, Coach Cliff Pittman, coming to you live from Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Maybe,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
yeah, Cliff, we're so stoked to talk to you today about what coaching actually is and isn't. And maybe we could just kick it off with you giving the audience a little background on who you are and what you do at CTS. I think that would be helpful because yeah, we believe you're an authority in the space, and I don't know if our audience is familiar with you. I hope they are, but give us a little introduction, a little insight.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I like to tell people that my background is a bunch of randomness that eventually like tied itself together. And over again, I've been in the right place at the right time, and I've benefited from that. And certainly a lot of that's privilege. It's not lost on me how many times mentors and others have contributed to where I'm at today. And a lot of it, my background is just being curious and gathering a lot of different experience in different areas. And coaching has been the common theme throughout like all of my different careers because the careers have been vastly different. And to
I,
kind of go all the way back to high school, I thought for sure I was going to run collegiately for track and cross country, and that was the direction I was heading. And then 9/11 happened, and at 17 years old, I had to get parental consent to join the Army and ended up joining the military and spent 10 years in the Army and went to school, studied business while I was in the service. And while I was in the military, I was also an Army fitness trainer. And so fitness became or maintained a very big part of my life and was also a training non-commissioned officer where I was responsible for the training of our unit and all the soldiers within it. Um, and after the military, after that decade of service, decided to go in a different route, thankfully, and started a new career. And that was in corporate America and worked for a Fortune 500 company in logistics and knew nothing about logistics. Um, Very quickly learned I wanted no part of that corporate job. And my ticket out of corporate America was coaching, but it was coaching in a different space. It was executive coaching. I quickly found that a lot of the executives that I worked with were really good in their domains, but also needed a lot of help outside of that, like holistically, in order to kind of just operate at the highest level and be efficient as human beings. And once I was able to replace my income and do that full time, I really just leaned into my passions of coaching endurance athletes. And a lot of it was coaching military operatives for like special forces or Navy SEAL training or whatever it might be. It eventually evolved into this sport of trail ultra running, and it was a really cool transition. And I think it was around 2019 or so. um, I reached out to Jason Coop, my mentor, asked him to coach me. He said he'd be willing to take me on. I asked him, I said, hey, can this come with like a mentorship to go along with that? Because I want to be a coach in this space as well, and I want to learn from you. And um, he took me on in that capacity as well. And over the years, that turned into an opportunity to join CTS. And so I joined CTS as an independent contractor, as a coach on the team. And then at some point, this role opened up to be the director of coaching. And it really tied all of my background together in coaching and leadership. And part of the time that I was in corporate America, I was also managing the talent acquisition team. And so there was a human resources experience there in talent acquisition and business development too. So all of that kind of came under one umbrella into this role where now I'm responsible for leading our coaching staff and the education in order to make sure that we stay um, relevant and doing the best that we can to serve athletes the best way possible.
Yeah, so you're a coach of coaches. In addition to being we're coaches and you're our coach, you are the meta coach of the ultra running and endurance running coaches at CTS. So you have, I think, a pretty unique perspective on what good coaching actually involves and what that looks like. So I'm curious if you could sort of walk us through what you think good coaching actually looks like. Like, what is I think so often what we see is like the tip of the coaching iceberg, right? And there's so much invisible or unseen work that goes into it. So from your perspective, what does good coaching actually look like?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for those compliments. I would say that what qualifies me the most to speak on this was how many mistakes I've made as a coach over the years and seeing what bad coaching looks like.
99 ways not to make a light bulb.
That's exactly right. And obviously, too, just from the mentorship that I have and collaborations with the coaches on my team and collaborations with like you guys and other coaches that I coach, makes me significantly better because of that. And what I've seen and observed, I think, over the years working with coaches specifically and in my own experience is three pillars, really, what it comes down to. And this is something that we teach at CTS. And the three pillars would be personal connection first and foremost. And so like that's the absolute foundation of good coaching is you have to have this connection with a human being. Otherwise, hey, you might as well go get an AI service and like get your programming done that way or, like whatever. But there has to be the strong connection there. And there's three C's. And I used to teach this when I was in a corporate job, but three C's of personal connection: caring, so human first, empathy oriented, and accountability. And then communicating, clear and concise communication to get trust and buy-in and education so that the athlete understands like why are we doing what we're doing. Um, and then the third would be curiosity. And there's two segments of curiosity where there's like technical learning, which is continuing education and mentorship and collaborations. And then the other aspect would be human interaction and just being curious about the humans that we work with and trying to understand why athletes are motivated, what they're fearful of, what drives confidence, like what are some of the roadblocks, what is their unique physiology, and asking good questions and being a good listener. So those are three C's of personal connection, which is the first pillar. The second pillar is evidence-based training and applied science. And I think that if you don't have that personal connection, that foundation, then it doesn't matter how much you know. Like you can be a physiologist and it doesn't matter if you cannot translate that into athlete behavior. And so but I think competence is a critical component of being a good coach. Otherwise, like we can just might as well get your friend to coach on vibes. Like doesn't matter what the training is.
My
And
magic
so
table and chat GPT.
that's right. Yeah.
Again
And
later.
so evidence-based training just means like we're gonna apply principles, universal principles, and not follow the latest fads or the latest trends or whatever's sexy at the moment. It's really what's rooted in scientific evidence and also application throughout years and years of an overwhelming body of evidence. And so what those principles look like are overload and recovery, or stress and rest is an easy way to understand that. And progression, like, getting better over time, bigger stimuluses for bigger systems, and individualization. Training needs to be very specific to the individual. Specificity. We shouldn't be training for 200-mile races. I know how you guys feel about 200-mile races. You shouldn't be training for 100-mile
Love them.
races.
It's a great,
Yeah, we shouldn't be training for 100-mile. We shouldn't train for hard rock the same way we would train for a 5K, right?
Yeah.
So
Be a
that's where
long day out
specificity
there.
comes in. Exactly. Um, and then periodization, just organizing training in a way that makes sense so that the athlete is going to put their best performance on race day. So that's evidence-based training and applied science. And then the third pillar that makes a great coach really, really good is using advanced technology and data analysis to inform decisions. And so, I like to say this all the time, that we coach human beings, not data files. And so that's where the personal connection is so important. But at the same time, objective data informs decisions. And so it's very helpful to be able to look at something and say, this is one piece of the puzzle. I'm noticing these patterns or these trends, because trends are always going to be more powerful than snapshots, and be able to have something concrete-ish to say, hey, we should probably make these different decisions in training or go in this different direction. So those are really the three pillars of what I believe is a good coach: is personal connection, evidence-based training applied, and data analysis and advanced technology leveraging decision making.
I feel like so much of that, well, one, there's such an interconnectedness between all of those facets of coaching, which I think is what makes coaching kind of an art form, more than anything else, because a great coach is able to discern between, how those individual pieces actually work together and when to draw on on which kind of thread. Um, but I feel like that leads me to a question that I want to ask you is like, what does a typical week look like for you with your athletes? Um, you know, yes, we are two of your athletes, but like, what does the day to day look like? I know that a lot of what you describe is, I think, work that is often like invisible to athletes. It's not necessarily like what's coming through in a response in training peaks or on a call even. Um, so I'm really curious to just hear like what the day and the life is like for you. Like, what is the actual application of it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I just had an athlete that I talked to yesterday that I've been working with for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. And she said, you know, people ask all the time, and I don't really know what you do, but whatever you're doing is working, because like, we've been getting better, all 5 years. And so I'm kind of like, yeah, you're right. There's a lot that goes
Same
on
with you.
behind the scenes. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And so for me, I've got my workflow established that works for me. And another coach, like you guys, may have an entirely different workflow that works for you guys. But at the end of the day, we're all probably doing very similar stuff. And, what that looks like is looking at training. And, I like to provide daily file analysis for athletes that I work with. And so that means that first thing in the morning, I'm opening up my training peaks where I manage and analyze training. And I'm looking at, okay, this was what was planned, what happened, how did it go? And then I'll look through the file. Um, I'll read the subjective feedback, and both of you guys do an incredible job with that, of saying like, this is how I'm feeling, this is how this workout felt. And so I look at all of that, and it's kind of like starting the day off with like a little bit of minutia of like, this is a small snapshot. So then I have to back up and be like, okay, like, what's the bigger context here? What are things looking at a 30,000 foot view? There's certainly different graphs that I can look at in Training Peaks to kind of get a good visual of that, like the performance management chart as an example. But really, it's more so just about like that human relationship that we have of like, okay, I understand like Zoe's, doing comedy, and she had a late night, at a show, and TJ's got this going on. And it's like all of that context comes in after I'm reading through data and after I'm reading feedback, and I'm looking at it through the lens of like what's going on in the individual athletes' lives. So after I spend time in the morning going through all that, then what it might look like is just spending time on the phone with athletes, regular touch points, talking through things. That's really where I get the opportunity to drive that like personal connection and also be curious and get to know the human being behind the data. And then, I'm also planning things out too, both on a macro level and on a micro level, and really tweaking and adapting and adjusting things. For some athletes, that means that we're adjusting things almost on a daily basis. And for other athletes that, like adaptations are very predictive and things are very normal and life is somewhat stable, then it's like, well, we're not doing a whole lot of adjusting. It's just kind of like things are happening as we expected. So I think that really what it boils down to is just a conglomerate of like judgment calls and making sure that as a coach, I have the right lens that I'm looking through at the biggest level possible. And then as I get down into the details, that I'm leveraging and using the right tools to make the right judgments and the right decisions.
To that point, I think that one of the big conversations is around the importance of individualization. Like that's so core to what we do as coaches. And yet, I mean, if you look at some surveys, which, grain of salt with self-reported data always, a lot of athletes are still using cookie cutter training plans. Can you speak to the importance of an individualized training plan and what that like really looks like, all the things that an individualized plan should be taking into account?
Yeah, you bet. I feel so strongly about it that as an organization at CTS, we will not provide static plans.
Yeah,
And like,
like when people reach out, we're like, nope.
yeah. And they're like, we will pay you. And I'm like, we don't want your money because like, I'm not willing to put, my reputation or our stamp of approval on something that should be adapted and changed within like days or a week. So
Yeah.
that's how important I feel about it. That's how important it is and how strongly I feel about that. So what takes into account is kind of what we talked about earlier with these different pillars, right? So personal connection, first and foremost, is understanding that as individuals, we're unique and different and personal, and we have different motivators, we have different life stressors, and we all handle these things very, very different. We have some of us value a lot of structure, some of us value a little bit more autonomy, some of us value process, some of us value outcomes. And so like all of these things cannot be accounted for in a static plan because by definition it's canned and it's static. And so the dynamic aspect of it is so important because it factors into who you are as an individual and as a person, takes into account all of those variables because the end goal is sustainable progress and growth. And so like that's the only way we're going to drive sustainable growth and progress over time is if we have something that dynamically shifts based on where you're at as an athlete, both physically and psychologically. And so it needs to be all encompassing, I think. And I'll also add that what we do in this sport drives a lot more variables. And so I'm more comfortable providing a static plan for someone running a 5K because it's very predictive. I know exactly what drives performance and the timelines to do it. And sure, we can work through the nuances of the individuality there a little bit better. But as soon as we start factoring in the volume required and to train for some of these ultra distances and big weekends and needing to factor in like work responsibilities and life responsibilities and relationships and fatigue, then it becomes a lot more variable and needs to be a lot more dynamic. So I think that the more variables are introduced or required for training and race demands, there needs to be more a dynamic approach to it. The last thing would be just where the athlete is. And if it's a brand new athlete, I think that they can maybe benefit more from a static approach and more of a canned approach, because if it's not a matter of some of the things that we already discussed in terms of the unique individual variability and personality and life stressors, if it's just physiology that we're talking about, a lot of time all the time, new athletes are going to get better no matter what they do. And like it's always it's always going to be interesting. Like it's fun, like as a coach, and this is great for new coaches starting out. Work with new athletes because you really, the only thing you can screw up is if you don't care about the athlete as a person. You're going to screw up every time. But the other thing is if you get the work to rest ratio wrong, like if you overcook somebody, if you give them too much. So you have to be able to manage the athlete's load. But if you do those two things really well, you can progress a new athlete extremely well because all stress is novel. and their system is just going to be embarrassed, essentially. It's like, oh, that was new. That was hard. That was embarrassing. I need to get stronger if I want to be able to run like that again tomorrow. And so once you've progressed over several years, where I think a dynamic coaching relationship is even more imperative is for advanced athletes. Advanced is relative. Experienced athletes who've been training for a couple years or more, because those stressors have to be more precise and more targeted towards certain adaptations or specific systems in order to get a meaningful result at that point. And so I think advanced or experienced athletes can benefit more from it.
Again, I think that's, one of the main cases for an individualized approach when you have such differences in ability levels, training history, and you have to take all of that into account. It takes quite a bit of time and skill on behalf of the coach to discern between all of those different factors and then produce a plan that will, ideally help the athlete to improve over time in a sustainable way. And so I guess that leads me to another question is like so much of that process of discerning isn't just about, analyzing data files. It really is about the human connection involved and then the communication that comes forward. So, how much time do you feel like if we were going to put this through a lens of like what good coaching should look like how much time do you think coaches should be spending with that communication process with their athletes? Is that individual to each individual athlete? Is that something that should be is there like a blanket rule that should be applied there? How do you create like that collaborative environment where the communication can happen and then you get the things that you need and so does the athlete, so that way there is progression?
Yeah, great question. I think it is pretty individual based on the athlete and their personality and their needs. But I also think there's the other side of that is I think there is like a minimum floor of communication, because there are certain times where I work with athletes that they're incredibly self-sufficient and they're wrapped up in their lives, and it's like they're appreciative that training is on the plan and they just kind of like go to work, right? And sometimes I have to say, I need more from you. I need subjective feedback. You're going to have to leave me, even if it's at the end of every week and you don't want to do it daily, compile your thoughts, go back through your training and let me know how everything felt, because I'm not going to be able to just effectively coach a machine. I need,
Yeah.
I need some context here. So I do think there's a minimum floor there of communication that has to take place. And if that minimum floor is just feedback on how the training is going and how they feel in the training and how they feel recovered or what stressors they're facing, that's good enough for me to be able to look at the data and say, yeah, that makes sense. That pairs. We can continue progressing, or, okay, yeah, we need to shift into a recovery deload, whatnot. And then, there's some athletes that just need more communication, and that's fine too. Like sometimes athletes need more affirmation, need for validation and confidence. Like at the end of the day, I always tell coaches, like we're basically confidence dealers. Like that's our primary objective here, is to make sure that our athlete is towing the line the most confident version possible of themselves. And we have a lot of tools to do that, right? It's the 3 pillars. Those are the tools. That's how we create confident athletes. And sometimes that requires more communication. And I think that, there certainly needs to be boundaries within a coach-athlete relationship, and those boundaries need to be respected on both sides. But there's certainly athletes that need more communication, and they deserve that as well.
Yeah, which is why I think like this is why there is no one like best coach for people. Like this
Right.
is why there are so many different personalities and ways of approaching things, which I think is a really beautiful part of this industry, as much as it also is a level of controlled chaos too. I'm
Agreed.
curious to that point, what do you think coaches can't do? Like what are the limitations of coaches? Like what are things that coaches shouldn't be proffering as like part of a service, like guaranteeing outcomes, overriding physiology? Like, what are the limitations of what a coach can do?
Yeah, absolutely. If a coach is guaranteeing outcomes, they're either very new at this profession or like totally ego driven. It's it really, as a coach, I think that our job is to be able to tell an athlete, based on all of this information, here's what I believe is possible or realistic. And that goes for goal setting, that goes for race strategy, and everything else. The coach is a guide. I don't know how many Star Wars fans tune into this, or if you
I
guys are
would
Star
guess
Wars
like it
fans.
probably indexes pretty high with Star Wars
Pretty
people.
high? Good. Okay, awesome. So like the coach is not Luke Skywalker. The coach is Yoda. All right. The athlete is the hero. The athlete is Luke Skywalker, and the coach needs to be the Jedi master behind the scenes, not in the front, not stealing all the glory. There needs to be the Jedi behind the scenes, pushing in certain directions and pulling in certain directions and guiding ultimately so that the athlete can be the hero in their own story. And so, um, and then in addition, the other thing that just kind of came to mind as you asked that question, I think that working in scope of practice is incredibly important. And I don't know if that was part of your question or
No,
not,
I
but I
think that's
definitely want to touch
for
on it.
sure.
Okay, good. I thought it might be, but working in scope of practice is huge. And as coaches, we're very much generalists. I kind of know a little bit about a lot of things, and I'm a master of nothing. And so, like, that's why I really enjoy working in like these high performance teams that we have, where we have, a dietitian, and we have a strength and conditioning coach, and we have a sports psychologist. And as a coach, I'm essentially just a quarterback. Like, I'm just basically, saying, okay, this is who we need to work with here. This is who we need to work with here. And really leveraging everybody else's expertise, because I am not educated in all of those things. I'm competent in some of them. I understand sports nutrition. I mean, I'm a certified personal trainer and understand strength and conditioning, but at the end of the day, those experts who operate fully in those domains are always going to provide a better service. And I will never get outside my scope of practice when it comes to dietetics or anything like that, because that is way beyond my scope. And coaches need to be very cautious about that. And I'm kind of pushing that front too on the strength and conditioning side. Like, if you're not certified in that area, bring an expert in, because you can absolutely hurt your athlete if
Yeah.
you prescribe something that is a load mismanagement or not appropriate for that unique individual athlete or their goals.
Yeah.
Let me jump in, Zoe.
Yeah.
I think, you said a lot of important stuff around scope of practice. And what comes to mind for me is something I think both Zoe and I experience, and we, are similar in our capacity as to you. Like, we manage and work with a team of coaches. Um, and we're consistently trying to pull in experts that then, our athletes can, benefit from. That way, there is a higher level of expertise than the individual coach can offer. But one of the things that I see as a challenge to this, and I'm curious what your response is when we consistently survey athletes or take information from the market, athletes actually have a high expectation for what skills their coach should provide. So their coach should not just be an expert in sports, science, and they should also be an expert in sports psychology and be able to provide strength coaching and nutrition coaching, and like the everyday athlete wants more out of one individual. So like, what is I know I could speak to like how we work within that at Microcosm, but I'm curious because I mean, quite honestly, CTS is like 6 times the size of Microcosm. So like, you have 60 coaches or something that like are going to be dealing with these challenges with their athletes, right? So like, how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, it's a very good observation. Um, so a few things come to mind. One is, just making sure that I think like building social capital with the right people, right? Is just understanding like who are the experts in the space and making introductions, and having those people as part of your team in some way. Doesn't have to necessarily be anything formal or official, but when an athlete starts to ask for something that's outside of our scope of practice, it's just a simple introduction of like, okay, this is beyond what I can offer you, and I want to introduce you to so and so. Not always acceptable, because then it's like, okay, well, that's an additional cost, So like, there's certainly issues I think that come along with that, and if they don't have abundant resources, like most people in this country right now, then maybe there's other solutions. So I think that as coaches, we should always be evolving and progressing ourselves. And that's like the technical curiosity that I talked about earlier, the technical learning. And so over the years, like every year, I'm just committed to getting a new certification in something and just staying, trying to continue to, I'm a generalist, but I'm also trying to like expand that. And so if an athlete comes to me and they want strength training and they want sports nutrition, and then of course, regular programming, like I'm competent enough to do all those within certain guidelines. So like I can provide a wide net of services as an individual professional. And then once we get past a certain point of like, oh, you need something for like daily nutrition prescription, or like there's like some other like psychological stuff here now that's into the fold, it's like, okay, now we need to bring somebody in because now we're above my pay grade or expertise.
Sure. I'll at least an observation from my career, because I started coaching when I was fairly young, is that pressure felt way more acute when I was younger and getting started as a coach. But then actually, as I've progressed my career and as I've educated myself more and accumulated more certifications, like as my knowledge base has expanded, my comfort and confidence handing people off to true experts has also expanded. And I think that I've really come to the place where like saying I don't know, or I think you'd be better served with an expert, like is one of the best ways to build confidence and trust and to like really service the athlete. And there have been a few times too where just getting curious and being like, okay, you say you want this help, like tell me more about it. And it's like, oh, actually, like you said you wanted nutrition help. That's a really big category. But do you even have a specific enough question to ask? And like getting curious about like, how big is this concern? Is this something that we can at least like start having a conversation with us? And then maybe we do hand you off to that expert, and maybe we at least problem solve a few things between the two of us. But my recommendation to a lot of folks that listen to this are not currently coached, at least by us. And so, I mean, and if statistics are to be believed, between 80 and 90% of them are uncoached. If you're thinking about working with a coach, someone who says they can do it all is a terrifying person that I would be extremely skeptical of, like, especially if it comes at a lower price, because that should lead you to ask a lot of questions about, how good is this full suite of services that any one individual can reasonably offer. And I think that, like, I totally understand the desire to have someone who can do it. Like, I would also love the Coach Cliff. Like, I would love the meal prep and the meal planning. And I would love for you to like make my bed and like figure out my dental hygiene, because like, goodness knows I need help. But like,
You need so much help.
you need so much help. Like, a certain level of agency is super important in the athletic process. And again, like I think that being clearer about like where the true value lies and where your scope of practice ends is one of the biggest things you can do as a coach. And for athletes, again, I understand where that like desire comes from, but I think it's worth interrogating with another level of skepticism of like, how much of that do you truly, honestly need day in, day out? And if you do need it, excellent. That's why we have nutritionists and strength coaches and, insert all the other experts that we work with.
TJ. And essentially the first thing that we should do is just set expectations appropriately. And Zoe, thank you for helping me jog my memory there. But it's just a matter of like, this is what I can offer you, and this is where I'm competent and qualified. And just starting the relationship off on the right foot and setting those boundaries in place. And I loved what you said about as in this profession, as you do it longer and you become better at your craft, the better you become at saying that I'm not comfortable with that, or I'm not qualified to do that. And that comes from a place of confidence, knowing like who you are and what you can provide. And I think that's a critical moment in a coach's career trajectory, is to get to that place, to not oversell what it is they're offering. Because at the end of the day, if you truly care about that athlete, like we talked about initially, at that connection, and you want to do what's right for them, then you're going to make sure that they're getting the best advice possible from the best resources and best experts possible. So like being honest about who you are and what you can deliver comes back to truly caring about that human being.
Yeah, I do think it is about taking the focus off yourself and putting it on the person that you're serving. If you feel like you have to be 20 different things to one individual athlete, that's most likely about your own emotional insecurity around your coaching, your boundary setting, and, other, things around security within that relationship with the athlete. For example, a really common one is, if I can't come up with an answer or help you find a solution to this, I'm going to get fired. And so I'm going to lose my job security. So, I think it is such a product of maturity. I see that a lot. I've seen that in myself, Zoe as well. One of the things that I think a lot about, and I consistently get questions from athletes about, and I think it would be helpful for our audience to hear, from another coach, another expert, is, when do we actually know the coaching is working?
Yeah. I think there's probably a few different, and I haven't actually thought about this and how to define it, but there's probably several different phases of this answer. I think initially coaching can work immediately when there's trust and buy-in, and when the athlete decides, like, you know what, this makes sense. Or maybe it's a matter of we're 3 or 4 weeks in and like I feel good, or maybe it's 6 to 8 weeks in and it's like, oh, I can see these adaptations. I can actually tangibly like observe, measure, or feel that I'm better than I was. So I think that can be, the benchmarks are big there. However you want to define those benchmarks, whether it be relationally or objectively in training, or measured through not necessarily direct measurement in physiology, such as like metabolic testing, but more so measured through objectively, like through the data. And Zoe, in your case,
Metabolic testing.
Love that.
Hey, if you've got the resources, do it.
That's right. If you get the resources.
Yeah.
And then I think that here's ultimately, so if you're a coach and you want to know, is my coaching effective? The single thing that you can point to is athlete longevity. Am I working with an athlete for an X period of time? And are they continuing to get better in that period of time? So how we measure that at CTS is retention rate. We just, apply our own math to this model of how many athletes are you retaining that are continuing to stay with you. Obviously, there's going to be some nuances here, because you have athletes that are like, oh, I got into Western States. I want to coach just to get to Western States. And poor AJW gets all of those. And so, and then they all, like, okay, we did it. We made it. Now we're on to something else. But at the end of the day, it all turns out to be a wash. If you work with enough athletes, and, our expectation is like 90% plus. And if you retain 9 out of 10 athletes per month, on a rolling average throughout, a year and beyond, you can say like, hey, doing a pretty good job that my athletes want to continue to work with me. So long term, I think that's the best measurement. to know that your coaching is effective. That's not necessarily an answer rooted in like continual progress, because at some point an athlete gets to a point where physiologically they cannot progress. And so, or it becomes a little bit harder and we have to move the goal post a little bit on what determines success. But is do the athletes want to continue working with you over time?
So one of my big, I guess, like a mind or brain explode emoji moment for me in the past year doing some market research was finding the fact that like aggregate data, the sort of baseline expectation of most athletes was that coaching should cost between $100 and $120. That's fascinating because the average cost of coaching is significantly higher. I believe it was closer to $200, maybe
$250.
$250 was the average charge. And again, there's a lot of data points going into there. But what I'm fascinated by is that gap. I'm curious, like, how would you speak to that gap for like a certain part of the market thinks a thing should cost this much, but in reality, it does cost this much? Like, how would you potentially try to, I guess, like for me, my interest is in educating folks and ideally trying to move them to the 200, like to that here's what this actually costs.
The expectation that coaching costs a certain amount.
Coaching costs a certain amount, but that's also my bias as a coach.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to hear the statistics of like how much do we think a car is worth or a house, because you're going to get a variety of expectations that are misaligned, so like if you think that I don't know, a Sprinter van should cost $20,000, then like your expectations are not aligned with what you're getting, right? So it's kind of like you just have to throw and so like absolutely let me say that there are coaches out there that are charging that expectation. Would you say $100, $120?
$120,
Yeah, so there's coaches out there that are offering that service and they're doing a good job. Like there's a place for that, and there's athletes that benefit from that. That's a far different service than what a lot of other coaches are offering, who value their expertise and their time more and therefore charge more. So it kind of comes back to supply and demand. It comes back to proficiency and expectations and services delivered. And so you're going to have a wide scale there. And while the expectation might be that $100 to $120, that expectation might only be coinciding with, well, I expect a training plan. Well, if that's the case, your expectations are correct. Like, so no one should be charging you more than that for a training plan. In fact, you should get it for far less. And but if you
PT later, so go ahead, stack that cash, get an HSA going.
That's right. But if you want to, like, if the stakes are high, or if you're an experienced athlete, or if your goal means a lot to you, or if you just have the expendable income, let's be honest about it, then you can justify paying for a higher cost service.
It sounds to me like there should be, or there is, an expectation that when you do pay for a higher cost service, you get a higher quality of service with that. It comes with a higher degree of expertise. It does come with better deliverables on behalf of the coach, different levels of communication and accountability. I don't know. Would you say that that's a fair statement?
Mostly. I think that what it comes with is better decision making.
Interesting.
I think that's really how you, make it tangible, I guess, is that you're going to get better decisions from who's guiding your training. And that communication might look exactly the same as a $50 service, because maybe that $50 service, maybe they have 5 athletes and they're just getting started and they're extremely green and excited and they're, all in. Like, that's great. And so they're going to get a lot of attention from that new coach, who might even communicate more than the coach who's been doing this for 25 years. But that coach who's been doing it for 25 years, who maybe has the education to back it up and the experience, the demand, because they've had a lot of success over the years working with, athletes, they can basically provide that level of confidence that the decisions that they're making in training are in fact best for that athlete and their long-term development.
How do you think about the value in coaching? Like, why do you think athletes can benefit from it for the folks that can? Which I guess statistically not going to be everybody, but a lot of people.
Yeah, one of our philosophies is to do no harm.
Mm,
And it's really just a forward-thinking model of whatever you do, don't screw the athlete up, because it's pretty easy to progress an athlete, but if you screw it up, then it's like you've done the worst thing possible. So, and it happens though. Let's not make any mistake about that. Like we all do it, even at the highest level. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna mess up at times. Um, but I think that the more experienced coaches and the better coaches take that very seriously and look through the lens of do no harm to the athlete. And if we can gain 10% in their capacity in a certain, context, but taking them all the way up to 10% comes with the risk, well, we're going to go like 7 or 8% and make sure we give ourselves some room in case that we didn't account for 3-4% that takes them over and causes harm.
yeah.
Why do athletes benefit from coaching? I
Why does our
think that
job?
what's that?
Why do we exist?
Yeah, I think it's because what the coach can offer is accelerated learning, um, where you don't have to go through as much failure. Failure is a certain part process for everybody, whether you're coached or not. But you take into account athletes that are like, okay, this is my fourth year at UTMB. I'm gonna get it right this time. It's like, okay, that's great. Like, I admire that. If you had a coach, then maybe that's like, maybe you get it right the first time or at least the second time. So then you just saved yourself like all this time and money and suffering, uncomfortableness by
Learning the
having
hard way in
somebody.
ultra running is extremely hard.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It makes me
Because a coach can they can manage the fatigue, the training principles, the practical advice on strategies, even all the basic stuff like gear, and how to approach these things. So I just think it's accelerated learning. It's like, okay,
Mm.
do you want to learn this in 4 years or do you want to learn it in one?
Who do you think can benefit most from a coach? You sort of, hinted at that as folks progress, you need more specific stimulus. Is there anything besides just like advancing athletes that might make them a good candidate for like, yeah, maybe I do need to phone a friend on this one?
Yeah, higher stakes would be one.
Mm.
If it's the goal that like lottery process, right? Finally get into Western States or Hard Rock. It's like, okay, there's really high stakes there because you've invested so many years into that. And so if you can accelerate your learning by bringing an expert on board to guide you, then I think that is a good candidate for coaching. And then I also think too, if you're a competitive athlete, and I don't mean professional like sponsored athlete because I think that's a given. They're like probably all of them need coaches, but if you're a competitive athlete where you're just thinking I want to optimize every aspect of my training to get the most out of myself, great candidate for coaching. On the flip side, there's athletes out there who don't
Yeah.
benefit from it.
Who do you think maybe like coaching isn't for them? What does that look like?
I think it's people who are taking a more recreational approach. Like, don't get me wrong, I think recreational athletes absolutely can benefit from coaching. But I think that the recreational aspect of having autonomy and freedom and exploration, while I try to make sure that all of that is part of the coaching process. And I just recently wrote an article on this balancing those two things in Ultra Running Magazine. I think it was maybe a print edition several months ago. But um, I think for the athlete who just really wants that aspect of it and not to be confined to any type of guidance at all, then probably this is a form of like self-expression, and it's the one thing in their life that they don't want guardrails or don't want
Mm.
guidance in their life. And it's like, I can totally understand why you would not want somebody like guiding your training,
Yeah.
especially if it's a coach that's a little bit more on the side of like controlling and
Mhm.
dogmatic.
Yeah. So I guess like my last question would be like for folks that maybe are considering coaching, what are those first steps in finding like the relationship that's the right fit for you and your needs?
Yeah, personal connection. It's like, and I think this goes both ways for the coach and for the athlete. It needs to be a good fit where both parties feel like they would enjoy talking to that individual on a regular basis. Like, when you and TJ are on my calendar, I'm like, oh, that's exciting. We get to talk about their training. I look forward to that. If you're at a point where it's like, you know, ah, this
That
coach
doesn't
knows a
spark
lot.
joy.
Yeah. If this coach like, okay, this coach knows a lot, and if you can say like, I really appreciate them and their knowledge, but I would not want to be on a call with them every week, it's not a coach for you.
Yeah.
So like, just remove the accolades, remove the expertise, remove the knowledge, and start there. Start with, would I enjoy working with this coach or not? And then if the answer is yes, then you can move on to, okay, if I would enjoy working with them, are they competent? Or do
Mm.
they understand like, evidence-based training principles and how to apply them to this sport and how to apply them to me specifically? And then the last thing, if you pass both those tests, is, are they actually looking at my training, and are they changing my training based on what they're looking at? Because, if they're getting training in a spreadsheet, like, what are you looking at?
Vibes. The
Right.
zodiac. Who knows? Horoscopes.
Yes.
Weather. Well, those are the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for joining. I feel like again, our goal was to sort of get outside of our two lady man echo chamber, and again, like bring in the person that we trust with our training into ideally like complicate and add nuance to some of our positions to sort of, it's talking about your own job is kind of can be a complicated endeavor. So bringing in a tertiary voice is, I think, really helpful for rounding out our opinions.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun, and I certainly appreciate both of you in so many different contexts. You're both doing a lot of great work in the coaching space and many other spaces as well. So thank you.
Right back at you. Cool.